You're listening to the Summer Series, the best of Business Essentials Daily. Today's episode is brought to you by Mazars. SoundCartel. People love a good story, and there are so many opportunities to weave the authentic angle of your business through sales, marketing, even branding. So how does storytelling for business actually work? From SoundCartel, I'm Nicole Goodman, and this is Business Essentials Daily. We all have a story to tell, each and every one of us, and we should use our stories to help build our brands and our businesses. Because storytelling works, says sales expert Colin Pearce, and he has examples to prove the point shortly. So, asks Heather Dawson, is it just that everyone loves a good story?
Absolutely. A good story. A bad story doesn't help anybody. I had an example of a bad story. A chap had been to South Africa and he said, I had a wonderful experience in South Africa. And we said, this will be good. We sat and listened, a friend and I. And he said, yes, I was walking down the street and these two chaps were walking towards us. And then they crossed the road. It was dark. And I said I wouldn't take a taxi. I walked home. And just then the street lights went out. Yeah. And my friend and I looked at each other and said, what was that about? What were we supposed to do with the story? It didn't start, it didn't finish, it didn't go anywhere. That's a bad story. Nobody wants to listen to those, but you want to hear what happened to the baddie. I remember recording a children's story at Channel 10 many years ago, the Forgive and Forget or Monkey and Crocodile story, and the crocodile had come to the king and been the lion, the king of the jungle. He'd be given a month in which to pay his rent because he didn't have it. He spent it on fairy floss and boogeyman masks at the show. And so the monkey was the last to come in and he was allowed to live in the forest for 20 cents. He was so cute and whatever. Then we broke for lunch. And I remember the props provider, a clever man called Davin, kept walking around the lunchroom and he said, come on, hurry up. And we said, what's the matter? You want to go home early? He says, no, I want to hear what's going to happen to that crocodile. So the idea of a good story is that there's some tension and hopefully the baddie's going to cop it or the goodie's going to come through. So we do love a good story.
Okay, so what has storytelling got to do with business though, Colin?
Oh, Storytelling Works. And Storytelling Works is the name of my book. But it's one of a series. Storytelling Works for, it just works. Storytelling Works for Parents will be the sequel. Storytelling Works for teachers and speakers. Storytelling Works for managers. Storytelling Works for salespeople. Storytelling works. It's long been said that we are wired for story. And more in the 21st century, we're wired for the fine nuances of story, such as I've said, story in selling, story in managing, story in creating dramas.
So when a manager, when a business owner wants to introduce storytelling to make better sales, perhaps,
Yep.
influence people, what do they need to think about?
Well, I think the best place to begin for any owner or manager of a business is to begin where the business began. I think you've had my good friend Bob Beaumont. I was helping him work out some induction systems for his people. 120 stores now. I started with him when there was one. And I met his father, Mr. R.J. Beaumont, always referred sacredly to as Mr. R.J. and Mr. Beaumont. And I asked Bob what his dad was like. And he said, well, go and ask some of the old employees. So there are people that had been with him for 40 years. And they said, oh, Mr. RJ, what a lovely man. And they would tell stories about he would give some of the people whose wives had been sick or whose husbands had died, he'd come out with a special turkey for them at Christmas, how he would deliver things to families, deliver tiles and grout to tradies who were caught at the last minute. And so we captured some of his values in the story. So now when a new person starts at Beaumont Tiles, they end up hearing the story of generous, good-hearted, good-spirited, kindly, well-meaning Mr. RJ. And they get the feeling that that's what this company's about. So if somebody asks you to go a second mile, you go 3. It's the story of the origin. And every business has an origin. This one does. A wonderful origin of the famous Michael Schildberger in the ABC with his colleague Heather Dawson and his clever young son Nick, and how it's all come through.
Yeah.
Find your founding story, get the values out of it and work it through. Now make sure they're the right ones, Heather. Shall I tell you what could be the wrong ones?
Yes.
Well, I worked with a building company and I used to make up a Greek name just for a sales prospect, I would say. So salespeople, when you're in a show home and in comes Mr. and Mrs. Athanasopoulos with their children Hula, Sula, Thula and Pula and Tula, one of the guys said, no, we don't sell to Greeks. I said, what? No, and they all shook their heads. There were about 12 of them. They said, no, we don't sell to Greeks. The boss won't accept an order with a Greek name on it for a house.
Good Lord.
So I went to him and said, why won't they sell to Greeks? They say you won't accept an order. He smacked his head and said, oh, no accounting for dumb. And he said at every Christmas party he tells the story of how he and his partner were dudded on a speculative building they did for a Greek guy. And he finishes the story by saying, just as a throw-off line, so don't ever bring me an order signed by a Greek. Now, that's just a funny way to end the story. He didn't mean I hate Greeks. He didn't mean I don't want to do business with Greeks. He didn't mean don't sell to Greeks. But he'd embedded that stupid story and the value system. They weren't selling 3 or 4 houses a month
to Greek people.
To Greek people when they could have. And that included anybody who looked Greek. So they walked in.
That was a bad story.
That's a bad story with bad values in it. That's a stupid thing to do. So you need to be careful about the stories you tell.
But make it good and people will come to you.
Yeah. Especially if the hero, the founder, had a problem, didn't know what to do, and he solved it one way or the other. And that just doesn't have to be in founder stories. You want to get a point across. You want to move people. I love what Andrei Segovia said, the famous classical guitarist. If you have any talent at all, it is far better to move people than amaze them. So you don't have to be a brilliant storyteller. You just have to find a way of moving them. I notice a lot of you here are having a problem with the customers taking you for granted. I remember when I first started, or just last week I was in or my doctor told me that he, or my psychiatrist told me when she was dealing with a similar, and there your story goes, with a little crisis and a solution. Can I tell you the pattern? George M. Cohan's pattern for a good story?
Yes.
Quickly.
Yes.
George M. Cohan wrote many wonderful Broadway musicals, including many of the club songs of the AFL footballers. He said in Act 1, get the people to like the hero. Act 2, get the hero up a tree. Act 3, throw rocks at the hero. And in Act 4, get him out of the tree. And there you have the crisis is resolved. A famous publisher had above his desk the sign saying, no clash, no cash. So you can have a crisis in your story for it to work. Little one, doesn't have to be much. I had hives last week and I went to the doctor. That's it. That's a crisis.
That was business coach Colin Pearce. Business Essentials Daily is a SoundCartel podcast. Producers are Nick Schildberger, Chris Ashmore, Jeff Waters and myself. Technical production by Pete Letts and Belinda Trimboli. I'm Nicole Goodman. Thanks for listening. We'll bring you more Be Daily next week. SoundCartel. This episode was brought to you by Mazars. To find out more, visit mazars.com.au. That's mazars.com.au.